Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Chax Chat podcast. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, an accessible document specialist, and an accessibility wizard here at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am also one of the other accessibility wizards, as it were, here at Chax Training Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. And if you'd like your certification too, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org and click on certifications to get yours. We'd love to have you as part of the group. We are a tight-knit community of web accessibility specialists, document specialists, and certified accessible core competency, which is really understanding the ecosystem of accessibility and people with disabilities. And I think that's a really good place for, managers and supervisors. It's a good place to start on your accessibility journey.
It is. Yeah. I feel like we should all have jackets like they do on Saturday Night Live. The 5 Timers Club have
there you go.
Jackets, everybody who's a IAAP. It'd be cool.
That'd be great. Awesome. Well, today, Chad, we have a really cool topic, right? We're going to talk about advanced infographics, right? Think of a water life cycle or a environmental impacts infographic that has lots of different layers and lots of different ideas and lots of different messages that need to be told. And how do you approach that from an accessibility standpoint? Because often it just gets, we see a variety of different things, but most of the time it's a giant block of alt text that someone tries to put in there that's generated from AI. Or something
novel.
Worse. Yes. Or something worse. That is just life cycle, water life cycle. And you're like, all right, that's not a very equitable user experience. So
it's either insufficient or way over the top, right? Like way more than we want. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I did a session at CSUN. Matter of fact, for those listening, if you have not been to the CSU Northridge Assistive Technology Conference in Anaheim that happens every year in March, it is absolutely one of the go-to events you should be attending every year. It is so powerful and a lot of great stuff to learn. But the session I did was on accessible infographics. And it was really well received. It was a packed house, and I really loved doing that session. So we're going to kind of walk through that and a little bit more of what to do. So I think we want to start with, what are some of the questions we should start asking ourselves before we even start creating the graphics or evaluating what we're going to do as a process?
Yeah. So I think the first question, right, and this is a very basic question, but I think it's an important question to ask for all of your graphics. I think the first question is this graphic useful, right? Does this graphic have a purpose? Does it have meaning? Is it important for me to include it in this document, right?
We're really talking about whether or not we should mark something as decorative or mark it as live data. Because something like a little snowflake symbol that sits next to a paragraph on cold weather warnings really isn't meaningful. But a diagram of snow and how it falls over a certain area, or the type of clouds that might be warnings for snow flurries or icy road conditions, that is meaningful, right?
Yep, absolutely. So, and at a more basic level, like a lot of times designers will just use pretty pictures in their document because it looks good. It's attractive. It's nice, but fundamentally it doesn't have any value. So that would be the first question I would ask, right? And then once you've decided to keep that element, Dax and I, you and I say this all the time. One of the best questions you can ask yourself about a graphic is, what do I want the user experience to be when they are reading information about this graphic, right? Because by answering that question, that is going to give you the guidance that you need to write that alt text appropriately, right? Because without answering that question, you're kind of like rolling the dice. You know what I mean? You're like, taking a stab at it, right? But if you can answer that question, that'll really drive you and give you some guidance.
Well, I like to think about it this way. I want to get to Disneyland. All right. I know Disneyland is my destination, but where am I starting from? Am I starting from my house, from my work, from the airport, from my friend's house? If you don't know where you're starting from, the directions to get where you want to go are impossible to figure out. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. They're like, well, I don't know, right? Or they don't know what they want the user experience to be. The opposite thing is, oh, I want to go on a trip. Okay, where do you want to go? Well, I don't know. I just want to go somewhere. All right, well, that's going to, not sure I can give you directions to somewhere, but, so whether you come at it from where am I starting from, or you come at it from where do I want to end up, either way, you've got to have point A and point B to figure out the path between.
Well, and one of the people that I came up through the graphic industry with, one of the things that he taught me early on was how to troubleshoot.
Sure.
Right? Like how to troubleshoot anything. Right. And he asked me the one day, he's like, you can either be on the ground looking under every rock for the problem, or you can be a helicopter at 30,000 feet.
Right.
Where do you want to be?
Sure.
And he's like, you want to be in the helicopter, because to troubleshoot appropriately, you got to be looking at everything. You got to have like a broad view. And I feel like we could apply that, Dax, to what we're talking about today, because I feel like a lot of times when people look at a graphic that they need to describe, they're too hyper focused from the get-go, right? Yep. Like they can't see beyond, right? So like I just taught this morning. They had a scatter chart.
Sure.
Right. And, right away, everybody's like, oh my God, like I have no idea what I'm trying to describe. And I'm like, of course you don't, because you don't know where you need to go. You don't know where you're trying to get. Right. And so that's the first question we have to answer is like, what do we want the user experience to be? What is it about this that we're trying to convey to the user so that they get something out of it? Right. I can't describe every single dot on this plot chart, right? That's craziness, right? There's got to be outliers. There's got to be something of significance that we need to describe.
Well, and I think that the questions that we're going to go over, and we probably should get through these fairly quickly. The questions that we want to go over are that helicopter view, right? It is asking these questions will help you get that 30,000 foot overview. So the next question you want to ask yourself is, how much interaction do I want them to have with what's going on? Because to take your point of the scatter plot, if I want the user to be able to navigate from one scatter plot to the next, to the one point, to the next point, to the next point, because it's all meaningful or because it shows a gradual trend, then I don't want that to be a PDF. I want that to be something like high charts or paracharts, where, they're an interactive HTML5 user-driven experience where I can move just pressing the arrow key from dot to dot and hear a variety of information, or something like sonification. My good friend Doug Sheppers at Paracharts, they have a great process for sonification of charts, so they can hear a tone. And as the user moves across a line graph or a scatter plot or some other graphic visualization, they hear an increase in pitch or a decrease in pitch. So it's not about hearing 25, 30, 35, 40. It is da, 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 da. And you get a much different sense of what's going on much more quickly than trying to hear numbers and trying to solve that math in your head.
That's super interesting, right? Because, I always say, like, as a sighted user, like, we have inherent benefits to us that we could process like a ton of information at a quick glance, right? Like when we look at that scatter chart, we can process, and we can identify that outlier. We can identify, really super quickly. And the sonification almost transfers that ability to users of AT, so they could do it by
auditory.
Auditory, yeah. Thank you. By auditory versus visual. And I think that's a really cool solution.
Well, if you think about it like this, Chad, envision this in your head. You're hearing a line graph and you hear, what did you just hear? What is that sound? Right?
It went up.
It went up at the end. It had a little bit of wave. It went down and then it went up at the end. It ended on a high note, right? And so being able to know that as a trend took you a half a second or 1 second to hear that, right? So it's really great. Paracharts is great. Look up Doug Scheppers, Scheppars on LinkedIn. He's a great guy to know. The next, so we want to understand, what do we want that interaction to be? The next question is, how many different stories are there to tell, right? So you look at your infographic and you're like, okay, this is a water life cycle, and I've got the water starts in the ocean and then it evaporates and it goes into the clouds and then it falls down on the earth as rain and goes through the tributaries and percolates back into the soil and back to the ocean. So how do I want to tell that story, right? How many different parts and pieces are there, right? That's really important to know. And then the last one is what we actually just kind of talked about, the delivery method. And I think that's the most important, right? Because if I'm designing in Canva, or I'm designing in Illustrator or InDesign or an online HTML, I only have certain methodologies available to me for each of those different platforms, right?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I think a lot of times people pigeonhole themselves into the format because they're like, oh, this is my only option, right? But by expanding your thought process, you may realize that, oh man, in order to, and remember, right, alternative formats are justifiably a way of presenting information. So if you can't do it in the PDF, there's nothing saying you can't put a link underneath it that'll take them to a much better user experience in another location.
Well, and we know that there are clients out there that do this all the time in higher ed, where they'll have a complex bar chart or line graph or infographic, and underneath it in small print is a link that takes them to an appendix in the back of the document, where there is live, regular paragraph text that explains at length all the different things. And some of you might be listening being like, well, why can't I just put that in as alt text, right? The reality is that that's a really poor user experience. First of all, alt text can't be copied. So if I want to extract some of that information to save or use somewhere else, I can't. I'm locked out of it. Alt text used to not be able to be paused. JAWS and NVDA now read a couple of sentences or a sentence or a phrase and then allow you to arrow down and keep arrowing down. So that's a little better user experience, but not every screen reader is JAWS or NVDA, and that's not always the case, right? The other thing is that when you're presenting all this data and I want to read something slower or word by word or phrase by phrase, I don't have that ability with alt text. I can only go back to the previous phrase, paragraph or sentence or whatever.
Well, and you have to remember all of it. Yeah. Right. Like if you're only trying to, delve into like a portion of what you're looking for, like you're looking for a specific piece of information, you got to peruse all of that to get what you want. And hopefully you can grab it as it's going through.
Remember it, because you can't even grab it because you can't copy it. So you're kind of hosed that way. So you now can, if you're an Illustrator person, you're designing in Illustrator, right? It used to be that you could, when you copied and pasted or you placed InDesign, an Illustrator file inside Adobe InDesign, it was just like a PNG or a SVG or anything like that. Now you can actually copy and paste from Illustrator into InDesign and retain some of those text elements. So maybe all the labels are the most important part. And I just want to hear evaporation, perspiration, percolation, right? I just want to hear those steps. Well, now I can supply those as live text and I can design it in Illustrator, bring it into InDesign and create a good user experience, right? Which leads us into our next topic, which is, okay, we've talked about the questions we want to ask ourselves, right? Now, we thought about what programs we want to start with. Now, how do we physically make this more accessible? And I think the first way is the way I used to teach it kind of at the beginning of when I started teaching advanced infographics, which is to chop it up or break it up into separate objects so that I can apply alt text to each of the different objects. But what are some of yeah, go ahead, Chad.
Well, and that's really easy to do in certain programs, right? Like I think PowerPoint allows you to do it fairly easily.
Right. The crop tool allows you to and some masking tools. Yes, absolutely.
And InDesign, super easy to do, right? In InDesign, I usually just do a copy, paste in place, right. And then I'll just kind of like crop into various
nudge
pieces,
it over.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although when you do that, Dax, you have to keep in mind that the user is going to read a bunch of figures in a row.
Right.
And from a typical document standpoint, that is unusual. It's like in most documents, you'll be reading text and figure, more text, figure, right? That's pretty normal. But when you run into like 7 or 8 figures in a row, that's very unusual. And so it's a really good idea when you have that situation to, in the first figure, say, in the following 9 figures, we're describing and you use the example of the water life cycle or, whatever your graphic is, just kind of like give them a heads up that you're about to read 9 figures in a row and just be aware that this was intentional. And so when you're reading that, now it's a expected user experience.
Right. And I think that's really a really great tip. And I think setting the stage for the user experience so that the user understands, because oftentimes they're going to press G to move from graphic to graphic. I can just, now that I know I've got 12 of them in a row or 7 of them in a row, I understand my navigation and it makes more sense to me.
You're right. The G key jumps from graphic to graphic. In most documents, I don't know why I would do that. But when I know I've got 9 figures in a row, now that's a useful thing to be aware of. Yeah.
Well, and you might press H if if you're used to just like hearing a graphic and then be like, okay, I don't really care about that. Skip on to the next heading. So you might press G, you get to the life cycle image and you just hear evaporation, right? As the alt text or graphic. And then it's going to say example of evaporation. You're like, okay, I don't care. H. And you skip to the next heading. Right. Now you've skipped 9 other graphics you didn't know were there because you're like, well, I just want to read the next heading.
That's a really good point. Right. It's like, it's good to make them aware of it, but there's a really good chance they're like, you know what? I don't have time to listen to 9 graphics, right? Let's just move on, and yeah.
But more options or not, it's really like listening to a list, a formal list. When you hear list 9 items, you've empowered me to make a decision based on what I want. But if I just hear bullet, John, bullet, Mary, bullet, at some point I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm good. I don't care how many more are coming. But if you say list 50 items, okay, now I can make some decisions about what I want, right?
Yeah. So then, the other option we have, and again, what I'm about to say, WCAG acknowledges this, and this is a valid thing that we can do, which is to place dummy objects behind the object to allow us to add alt text to it, right? So, like sometimes graphics will end up being naturally broken into multiple pieces, right?
I think a flowchart, if you look at a flowchart, you've got 9 processes in a row. That's a typical, and you might get that as a PNG, right? As a single one thing.
Yeah. It's, well, In the case of a PNG, I guess this technique would be a little bit harder, wouldn't it?
No, because you would just like if I'm an illustrator, if I'm in InDesign and I have to drop in this flow chart as a PNG, I am going to mark it as decorative. And then I'm going to draw boxes, physical black boxes in InDesign in the area where each of those little flowchart pieces are and put them behind the graphic. Then I can adjust the reading order in my articles panel and apply alt text to each one of those.
Yep, absolutely. It's kind of doing the same thing as breaking up the figure, but we're now just kind of saying, no, I'm just going to put some fake elements in there that are not visible to the user, to any other person, and I'll just add alt text to them and have them be read. Yeah.
Well, and it's similar, but not the same as putting a table behind a graph because, and here's the thing, when you're just putting a box that you can apply alt text to, like in a flow chart, the shape is relatively representative of the visual that the sighted person is getting, right? It's relatively in the same place. The table in place of a bar chart or a line graph is a completely different user experience. And if I'm sighted and I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a line graph, but I'm hearing a table, that is definitely not an equitable user experience, especially from a cognitive standpoint. I'm seeing a dissonance in between what I'm being presented with and the visual that I'm seeing.
Well, but I think this goes back to the intent. Don't you think? Right? Like if the intent of the graph is to show the trend over time, I 100% agree with you that a table's a bad replacement for that. But if the intent is that the user needs to know the data points of the table, the data points of the graph, then the table could be a good alternative to trying to describe that in alternate text.
Now, here's the thing though. I agree with you 100% that a table is a good alternative when all of the data points are what I need to show, because listing every one of the 20 data points in alt text would be arduous. Yeah. However, because it's not just about people who are blind, it is about people with cognitive disabilities. The best use case for that is to put that table as a visual item either after the line graph or bar chart or at the end of the document in that appendix section, because now you can just say line graph showing the blah, blah, blah data points as explained in the following link to the data table. And then now the user can then go choose to read the data table. And you can provide the summary. You can say, you can use it as the general alt text of showing the variety of income ranges from 2012 to 2022 as described in the data table and the following link. And then they can go deep dive.
That's a really good point, Dax. And I think we all need to remember that we're creating digital documents.
Right.
We're not printing them.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the print world, you add pages, it gets more expensive. Yes. In a digital document, who cares, right? You add another page, you add 5 pages, no big deal. So I like that idea. And you're right, because I feel like sometimes, even as a sighted user, maybe I'd rather look at that table than at the bar graph, right? Yeah. Maybe that makes more sense to me, right?
Sure. So people digest information in different ways.
Really good point. I mean, but although even though sometimes hiding so when would you hide the table? Like when does that make good sense?
I used to say a lot more than I do now. I would say now, kind of doing this for as long as I've been doing it, I use it as a last resort. I try very hard that the user experience visually is congruent with the experience that a sighted person would get, because there are lots of people with traumatic brain injuries or with cognitive processing disabilities. Because if I'm blind, it doesn't matter. Present the table, present the bar chart with alt text, present both of them one after the other. Who cares? Because you're getting all of that without clouding or making it difficult to understand one experience from the other.
I will tell you, though, when I typically run into this problem is when I get those clients who are like, absolutely not.
Right.
I don't want a table appearing next to my bar graph.
Sure.
Absolutely not. And so like in those cases, then I'm inclined to hide it, behind the figure. And
yeah, I think it's a good, better, best. I think I would probably argue, inform the client that, hey, then great, let's put it on a web page somewhere. We can link to it on a web page. It doesn't have to be part of this document. But I think that you just have to remember everything's a trade-off, right? A good, better, best. If I'm doing the best job I can, I want to separate those two user experiences. I don't want them overlapping, right? All right, then the next way you can do this is, can text tell the story? Because often we have an infographic, right? We have a client who has their financial planner, and they say, look, they have this pyramid chart that says, get 10 clients, have interviews with all 10, 8 of them are going to need this service, 4 of them are going to need this service, and 1 of them is going to be your prime client, right? That visual representation can be told in the text of the story. The graphics themselves really aren't adding much to people sitting at a desk, one person watching a video, that kind of thing. Who cares? The text that went along with those was telling an adequate story. So when the text can tell that story, just keep it as live text and put it in the order in which that makes most sense for the user to just walk through that content.
I actually prefer that, Dax. I kind of love when people add those text, and again, I'm using InDesign as an example, but they add those text elements in InDesign.
Sure.
And maybe the graphic element is just a graphic in the background. I'm like, I love that because now I can just have it read in the right order and it creates a really good user experience, Yeah.
PowerPoint's good for that too, because it no longer does the nested alt text error that it used to do. If you had text inside a shape, it would bury it inside the figure, and that was all problematic. That's all gone away thanks to the folks at Microsoft. Thank you so much. Now just stop adding alt text to my smart art that's like arrow or box or rectangle. Like, I don't want you to add this hidden alt text to my alt text. Let me be in control of that, right? That's
in my class that I did today, they asked me about a org chart. Right. And when I looked at where the document was built, it was built in Canva.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I'm like, guys, like you can actually do this in Canva now. Right.
Yeah.
And, but what I noticed in Canva, I opened it up and I did an example. Every arrow and every box, it considered a figure.
Sure. Yeah.
So I
didn't
had to
know
go
what was decorative or not. Yeah.
But the nice thing about Canva, though, it did allow me to go through it. I could just check them all.
Yep.
And then I click a button at the bottom that says mark as decorative. I'm like, all right, that was efficient. That was good. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and for those of you listening, just as a little bit of a callback, we did a podcast a little bit ago about Canva, and we had mentioned that the reading order was not able to be added to the document. We actually figured that out. On export, there is a checkbox that says use layer order for reading order. If you have to check that box when you export the document. Now, there's one more caveat. There's several different types of documents. One is a dynamic sized document. It doesn't have a fixed page length. Those documents, it doesn't matter whether you check that box or not, it won't set the reading order correctly. But anything that is a fixed page layout, an 8.5 by 11, an A4, a slide, all of those, you can set the reading order by checking that box. So just make sure you start with the right kind of template and you will be able to set that reading order.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so we've used live text to tell the story. The last one, Chad, is?
So if you can support your infographic using body copy, please do so, right?
Yes.
Like there's no better way to provide additional context to a graphic than to actually describe it in the body copy of the text.
But it requires one thing. And what is that one thing, Chad?
Do I need to reference the figure? in the body copy?
When do we figure out that we need body copy? When's the best time to decide I'm going to support this graphic with body copy?
During the design phase,
during the very beginning
phase.
Right.
Yeah. Because you're right. I see where you're going. I missed that softball again.
That's okay.
If you're in the PDF file, you're SOL, right?
The
what
cake's
are you
already
going to do
baked.
at that point? Yeah, you can't do anything. But if you address it at the design phase, now we can massage the text. We can refine what we wrote. We can add some descriptive information in there, and that's going to help your project move along a lot more smoothly.
People hate change. And if you wait for accessibility at the end and you say, oh, well, we've got this complex infographic, we need to add a paragraph. They're like, add a paragraph. Oh no, Armageddon, right? That's harder. But if you're like, hey, we've got this complex infographic on page 12, when we write this body copy that talks about the natural life cycle of, water, we need to make sure that we describe this a little bit more detailed as to the main points. Okay, great. We can do that, right? And that paragraph might become 20% longer because we've now taken some specific steps to make sure we diagram out or verbalize what it is that we're trying to get from the graphic. So that's really important. If you don't do it at the beginning, if you don't incorporate that into your design, I promise you 80% of the time it's going to get, we'll do better next time. And off you go doing something else. So absolutely. So hopefully those things are going to help you. You can chop it up into multiple objects. You can place some dummy objects behind your graphic and then write alt text for that. You can use text, the live text, to support the story, tell the story with live text. Or finally, you can just add paragraph text that explains the point, right, of what you're trying to do. So those are the things. Now, as we come to the end of this podcast, we want to give you guys some thoughts. Now, all of these things, we've gotten step 1 in the planning phase. Step 2, we've implemented a methodology. Now, step 3, we need to actually write some alternate text that supports our infographic, right? And that's really important. So there are some options that you have for supporting your body copy or your graphics with alternate text, right, Chad?
And one of the options is get some help, right?
Sure.
Like you are not, you may not be the right person to write the alternate text for this graphic, right? Like somebody along the way asked you or provided you with this graphic and said, put this in this project. I want this to appear along with this, information on the page. They are probably the person that you should ask for help writing alternate text for that figure because they probably know best what the message should be, about that graphic.
Right. And so when you approach them, it's really important that you don't walk up to them and say, hey, I need you to write some alt text for me.
Yeah.
That is a first way to really scare someone off, right? So the way you approach it, you say, hey, this graphic's really great. Can you tell me what's the most important? If you could tell someone one message about this graphic, what would it be? Oh, well, that's easy. That's this and this and this. All right.
Yeah,
is there any other message that you think is equally important or even secondary? Yeah, it's this and this. And they're going to help you build that alt text without feeling like they have to be an accessibility anything. They're just telling you a story, right? But the easiest way to be like, get them deer in headlights is to say, hey, I need you to write me some alt text. It needs to be 250 characters, which really isn't even a thing anymore because the length of alt text should be as short as you can make it while being meaningful. And if that's 2 sentences or 3 sentences or 5 sentences, then it's what it is. But if you can do it in 3 sentences versus 5, do it in 3, right? Be shorter when you can.
We always say be as concise as you can while still accurately describing, what it is.
And the easiest way to not be concise as you can is to use AI. And I love AI. I literally live in AI all day long, every day. But I know that when it comes to alternate text, it is a starting point. It is here's my infographic. Here's the page with the context of what it means. And then AI can come up with some alternate text. I can give it some guardrails, but then I want to take that and refine it. How can I pare it down? What information's redundant? What information's not useful at all? Don't just accept what AI tells you as, okay, great, copy paste.
I'm glad you said that, Dax, because I had one of the attendees of one of my sessions. She did exactly that. She uploaded it to ChatGPT and got a description. Now the description was actually pretty good. I thought it did a pretty good job. Yeah. Like sometimes I think you're going to get good results. Other times you might be like, "Ooh, wait a second, we got to pare this down," But I like the idea of using it as a starting point, right? Not using AI as like the de facto end all, like, yes, this is what I'm going to use, right? Use it as a starting point and kind of refine from there. Yeah, I like that idea.
Awesome. All right, guys. So ask yourself, what do we want the user experience to be? How much interaction do we want them to have? How am I going to tell the different stories? How many stories are there? And what is the delivery method? How am I going to get this to them? Because we love PDFs. We know that we can make a PDF accessible, but it's not always the best format. Sometimes it's video or audio description or HTML5. It doesn't always have to be a PDF, right? And then we've got the different methodologies, Chad.
So the different methodologies, again, we talked about this. You could chop up the object into multiple different pieces, right? You could also place dummy objects behind it to kind of represent where the elements are, within the graphic. You can use a text overlay, right? A combination of live text and objects.
Right.
And you could also use, as we said, body copy to support your infographic, right?
Right. And then when it comes to writing the alt text, can I use context clues from my page? Is there information in the paragraph above or below my graphic that will help me write the alternate text? Can I use AI as a starting point? And then, as you pointed out, Chad, can I talk to a subject matter expert that can help me fill in the gaps? And sometimes it's better for you to start with a description and give it to the subject matter expert and say, how'd I do? Sometimes that's an approach that works, right? And then lastly, can I consult with a representative of my audience? So we here at Chax Training Consulting have several people with disabilities that are part of our Chax family. And one of those people is Kristen Waitucky. She's been on several of our webinars and is an integral part of our team. And she is blind. Did you know she's an award-winning writer, Chad? Did you know that she was?
Yes. Yeah, she's quite talented. Yeah.
And anyway, she's a great proofreader. And in fact, I do give her some of my things all the time to proofread what I'm writing. But for alternate text, you might give this to a person with a cognitive disability or a vision disability and say, hey, what do you think? Just be careful that one person's representation of whether or not this is a good user experience or not is just that. It's a guidance of, just take it with a grain of salt, that just because someone says this is the way I prefer it doesn't mean everybody prefers it that way. Just like the describing ourselves, when you stand up in front of an audience and say, my name is Dax Castro, I am 6 feet tall with thinning hair, I've got a salt and pepper beard. I hate doing that. I refuse to do it. But some people like doing that. They like hearing it. They like having that user experience. And just because I don't prefer that doesn't mean everybody else doesn't.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. So I hope you guys, we've got given you some great information about processing complex infographics. Chad, thanks so much for weighing in. I think we, back and forth, we've hopefully given everybody some good things. And in fact, we've got an upcoming class, right?
We do, Dax. You mean our drop-in class?
Yeah, our drop-in class online. We have these 3-hour drop-in classes that are really great.
Yeah, I don't recall. Do you remember what the date was on that, Dax?
It's the last Thursday in August. It is the document testing with Adobe Acrobat.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And in that class, we basically go through, basically like how can you test your document within Adobe Acrobat? We're going to walk you through the tags tree. We're going to evaluate the tags. We're going to go through the document. and you're just going to learn how to utilize Adobe Acrobat to evaluate and test your document so that you can ensure that it's as conformant as possible.
Right. And if you're interested, there are other 3-hour classes. You get a live record. You get the recording of the class or several handouts. And then honestly, if you want to have a live class with us in person, where can they find us, Chad? Where's the next place we're going to be?
So in November of this year, so November 2026, so Dax and I are doing a pre-conference session at Adobe Max in Miami. Yep. So November 8th and 9th, you will find us doing a pre-conference session in Miami. The Adobe Max runs through the 12th. So it technically runs from the 8th to the 12th, but the regular conference is the 10th to the 12th, and then pre-con is 8th to 9th.
I happen to have it on good authority that we might have some "But Is It Accessible" Chax t-shirts at our pre-conference session for anybody who wants to, who signs up for our conference. We might have a few of those to give away. So
how did I not know about that? How am I just finding about it now?
It's late breaking news, Chad. Late breaking news. Exclusive even to you.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see them and check them out. But thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope you found it useful, and we hope to see you, in Miami if you choose to join us there. But otherwise, we hope to see you somewhere else. And thanks for showing up today. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.